have you learned something new about cover crops today? What have you learned? Let's do a review session. Exactly, it can work and it can't work. I know that, like Brent said at the beginning, there's a lot of interest in cover crops. There's a lot of articles about how they can do wonders. But really, if there's any take-home message today, it's that you have to understand your system, and there may be something cover crops can do for you, but you have to adapt it to your needs and your system to make it work. Clayne earlier talked about how, in dryland systems, here in Montana, they've done a lot of work, and we're not seeing really those benefits of diversity necessarily. But with peas, we are seeing some benefits because it fits the system. It's really a water limited and nitrogen limited system. You have premiums for higher protein. So in that kind of system, by building up that N cycling with those legumes, you can see benefits. In other systems, you're going to have a different solution where cover crops might work in a totally different way. Fabian talked about with vegetable production or with integrating livestock, there are other ways to sort of skin that cat. And I think in irrigated production, I think that certainly Montana State has not done a ton of research for irrigated systems and how to fit cover crops into that. But we're starting to, and I'm really, I think you'll get a lot of great on-the-ground knowledge from the producer panel that'll be at the end just after my talk. So these are folks who've tried things out and really had some hands-on experience fitting it to that system. So anybody in here, I'm going to talk about cover crops and pasture poultry. Anyone here raise poultry? What? 2 hands there, 3 hands. So many that don't, most that don't, but if anything, I think you can get from my talk lessons in how to make the system work. And really, I think that the main lesson here is understanding what your needs are in the system and how you can integrate livestock with those cover crops to maximize the profit of those cover crops, and also thinking about what those livestock are doing for the subsequent crop phases, and how you can balance all those things to make it work. So, like Brent said, I am the director of the Western Ag Research Center over in Corvallis, over in the Bitterroot. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Ag Research Center over there. It has not been active in recent history. I started there a couple years ago, and we've got a lot of things going. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And then I'll move on to talk about sort of the challenges of cover crops in irrigated systems. Obviously, you don't have fallow there. No one's going to fallow irrigated ground. So how do you make those cover crops work? And those solutions are going to be different. And I'll talk about a system for small-scale vegetable growers that we're working on that's really looking at ways for market gardeners who are either producing organically or are certified organic, ways that they can use cover crops and livestock to address some of their fertility issues and also make some money on those cover crops as well. So I'll talk about the potential benefits of that system and kind of describe the system. And we've been playing around with this for just a couple years, so we have a few preliminary results. I'll focus a little bit on the production and the weeds, but I'll also get into some of the back of the envelope economics and to sort of demonstrate the potential of the system. But again, I'm an agronomist, a horticulturalist. I wear lots of different hats, but I'm certainly not an economist. But this will show you, it's mainly there to demonstrate the potential benefits. So take it with a grain of salt. So the center. We are one of 7 agricultural research centers across the state, each tasked with serving a unique agricultural constituency in that region and across the state. And so for us, it's horticultural crops, and it has been from the beginning. The center was started over a century ago during the apple boom, and I'm sure many of you are aware that that the bitter at that time in the 20s and 30s was one of the major apple producing regions in the country. You know, we had 10 to 15,000 acres of just apple orchards at that time. Really, yeah, it was wall to wall or mountain range to mountain range of apples, anywhere between the irrigation ditches. And so it started with an emphasis on those horticultural crops, and it really continues today. And while we don't have these massive apple orchards in the valley, we still do have some, but horticultural crops still play a role in our state. A little bit about the climate before I get into that. So we have good growing conditions relative to the rest of the state. We're zone 5, not a lot of people can say that. Not a lot of rain, so everything's irrigated, and a really long growing season. Over 120 frost-free days a year. So a lot of potential. Obviously, apples grow there, and so do a lot of other things. And it's the banana belt of Montana. So this is what we dress like every day to go work. Bananas not so much, but a lot of other things. So getting back to what I was saying before, really what our primary mission is, well, why our primary mission is specialty crops, so high value, small acres crops, is that a lot of the prime agricultural lands around our major metropolitan areas in the state are really at risk to development. And it's a shame to lose them to suburban sprawl when those areas could be feeding those people in those areas. And to stay, so this is a map that demonstrates that. So the red areas are areas with high value ag land that are threatened by development. So you can see Kalispell Flathead, Missoula Bitterroot, Bozeman, Great Falls area, Billings area, and Sydney and some others. So these are areas with some of our best available water for irrigation, best soils, but also threatened by development. So we cover a considerable portion of the state, and those high value crops can play a special role in keeping those ag lands productive. But I think we can play a role with fruit and vegetable production for the rest of the state because the truth is there are many parts of Montana that don't have, that need more fresh fruits and vegetables locally produced. So the map over here on the, Brent did give me a pointer, I might as well use it. So the light green areas are areas with reasonable access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And the dark green areas are so-called food deserts where more than 50% of the people lack access to fresh fruits and vegetables. There's not a local grocery store that stocks that's close by. And so if you overlay these two maps, we pretty much cover the state, and I think we can hopefully serve producers across the state, not just around our metropolitan areas. And I'm sure you're all aware that, I mean, there is a growing market for locally or Montana grown vegetables. Farmers markets popping up in many communities across the state and continue to grow, as do the number of farmers who are giving this a go. So where do cover crops fit into this kind of system? So in general, I talked a little bit about how cover crops have to play a different role in an irrigated system. In an irrigated system, you have the potential to grow a cash crop every year. There's no need to recharge the soil water. And so if you're going to do a cover crop, basically you either have to be growing it on a shoulder season when you wouldn't be growing a cash crop, or more likely, that cover crop has to make you money somehow. And so in vegetable production, you typically, for market gardens, you typically have something like this, where you have a diverse rotation, or like the rotations Fabian was showing in his talk. And you've got the potential to benefit from those cover crops or green manure crops, legumes for your soil fertility. But producers may be reluctant to use them because you're not going to make any money. So how do we make some money? And they can make a considerable amount of money. So crop values, so this is not profits, but crop values for vegetables range from about $5,000 to $30,000 an acre. So can you get something that can compete with that? That makes it a bigger challenge. So that's kind of what we are trying to do. And in vegetable production, in perennial fruit production, like orchards and vineyards, there's fewer trade-offs. You've got the spaces between trees or between the grapevines where you can grow cover crops for beneficials and all sorts of things and pretty flowers. And you don't have those trade-offs, and it's a lot easier. But in these intense irrigated systems, it's a bigger challenge. So what we're looking at is integrating crop and poultry production. I'm calling this not cover crops, but cover flocks. Partly because many vegetable growers already raise poultry. And grazing those poultry on the cover crops may provide increased profits and efficiencies in the system. And primarily the efficiency we're targeting, again, this is for growers who are trying to grow organic, whether it's certified or not, but there are market premiums for that in local markets. Because fertility in those systems is really expensive. So if you want to put enough animal manure on your garden to grow vegetables for several years, you're talking about putting 2 to 3 inches of composted cattle manure, dairy manure on your garden. And that can cost up to $8,000 an acre. It's really expensive, and that's just for the stuff. That's not trucking it in and spreading it and incorporating it. So it's pretty expensive. Can we do a cover crop, cover flock that makes that more efficient and gives you fertility at a cheaper rate? And I always show this slide because people are like grazing poultry. I mean, we think of sheep and cattle grazing. Chicken, we think of scratching around and eating grain, but they can consume quite a bit of biomass. So this shows that this is a cover crop in a garden out east where it's humid and things grow like weeds. So that's quite a bit of biomass there. And 2 weeks later, with a flock of chickens, they've eaten it down to almost nothing, tilled them, consumed a lot of that plant material, sped up the nutrient cycling, and also tilled in, because they're scratching around, tilled in a lot of that biomass to speed those nutrient cycles as well. So a potential, they do have potential as a grazer. So yeah, with our cover flocks, we're talking about using them as a part of the rotation. So you would come in 1 year, you're grazing, you're planting a cover crop, we're moving these chickens raised for meat in these mobile cages across the cover crop, putting down a lot of fertility, growing some meat that we can sell, and then growing veggies, hopefully for several years afterwards, because we've put enough fertility in the ground that we can get back to the main crop for these producers. So, and why is this system more efficient? I mean, one, when you're separating animals from crop production, if you're putting them in 2 different places, you end up having to deal with a lot of crap, literally. You've got to move it, right? So here, we're depositing the manure evenly and in the right place, in the place where we will grow vegetables years down the line. There is also some research that pasture-raised poultry has improved meat qualities, both in flavor and texture, and certainly the market is willing to pay for that. They value a pasture-raised label on poultry. And so in talking to local producers, They're selling their processed chickens for $3 to $3.50 a pound for pasture raised. And if it's also organic, you can add another $1 to that for local organic pasture raised poultry. So for a 3 to 4.5 pound bird, that's a considerable return per bird. We're also looking at the benefits of using this system for pest control. So Fabian talked about with his sheep grazing and vegetables, there was a lot of weeds, pigweed, and mallow that we're going to see because those sheep were not consuming those weeds, making problems for weed management down the line. In our system, what we're trying to do is have a high enough stocking density where we are grazing that cover crop down to the ground, almost, and then moving off of it, and then staying off of it until it comes back up enough, and we'll rotate that pen, that cage, back onto it once it's recovered. In that kind of system, we would like to see very little weed seed production because we're not giving it enough time. We're knocking that cover crop down repeatedly through the season, kind of keeping it always in an early growth stage. So the overall objectives of our project are find a way to rest the soil, not till it so much because in vegetable production that is a big concern. You're breaking down the soil structure, can run into problems there. And also improve soil health by growing some of these cover crops. But to be able to justify it, we've got to do better than just bringing in manure. We have to have it be profitable, both on the poultry side and on the nutrient side. So we can have the fertility for the subsequent vegetable crops. So the first year we tried this, which was a couple years ago when I started out there, we really wanted to see, how does it compare to just a traditional small-scale poultry production for meat. So a confined system where we've got just a chicken run, they're not moving around a lot, we're just feeding them all they can have, all the manure staying there, we can't use it for the crops, compared to our pasture system where we've got the birds in this 10 by 10 cage, which is moved daily through our cover crop. So that was and we wanted to see, do we get similar meat production? Does it take longer for the birds to mature? And do we get any savings because the birds are eating a lot of that cover crop? Are we actually saving on our feed costs? Is that a way we can get some efficiencies there? So what did we find in that first year? Well, when they're out in the pasture, they're not growing quite as fast. So this is showing the weight. This is compressed just at the end of the season. This shows the control, our confined chickens. They hit, this is in kilograms, so this is about a 4-pound bird. This is live weight, 4 or 5 pound bird. A little earlier, about 2 weeks earlier than our pasture. But this wasn't the nail in the coffin, they're just a little bit slower. And for our fertility side, it's almost better that they're out there a little bit longer because that allows us to pump a little bit more fertility into the soil because we're bringing in feed, so we're adding fertility. The longer they're out there, maybe the better the vegetables will grow. We had similar meat production at harvest, so this is carcass weights after we process them. Again, in kilograms, so we're talking 3-pound birds about. We didn't actually save that much feed. They ate a little bit less, but not a lot. And why do you think that is? They ate tons of bugs, they were eating the forage down to the ground, but we only cut our feed by 5%. Any ideas? They were turning it back into fertilizer, but they were eating the same as the ones that, even though they were eating a lot more forage and a lot more bugs, they basically ate the same as the ones that weren't getting moved at all.
95% of grass or vegetables and fruits are water.
Yeah, it may be that there wasn't that much quality, forage quality in there, but they were also a lot more active.
Yeah.
They're flying around, not flying, but running around, looking for bugs. When we would move that cage, they'd go nuts. They would search every inch of that new ground for any kind of bug, and then they would start to go after the cover crops. And a lot more active, a lot more social. I think that's where we got it, and maybe we get some things back in terms of meat quality. But the larger lesson was we didn't really do it right. We put the cart before the horse. We only had 10 birds in each of those cages, and we were rotating over about 2,000 square feet. We put down, we looked at it with soil tests and did the calculations afterwards, and we were not adding any fertility at all. So not only were we putting the cart before the horse, we weren't thinking about the right end of the horse or the right end of the chicken. We needed to be thinking about our system from what the chickens were giving to our vegetables and how much manure was being produced in this rotation. So we redesigned it to really get those nutrient benefits. Because remember, this is the big cost. Nutrients are very expensive for organic production. You're going to bring in manures or other certified organic forms of nitrogen. They're really expensive. So yeah, our stocking rates were too low to produce what we needed, and we were moving those cages, those chicken tractors over too large of an area. So we redesigned the system, tripled the stocking rate, shrank the area that we were rotating our chicken pens to get 150 to 200 pounds of N, total N. This is not readily available nitrate, but this is total N that should be released over the next couple seasons to really get those production benefits down the line. So what that meant was 30 birds, tripling the stocking density, 30 birds per cage per 100 square feet, and we moved that daily across about 1,600 square feet. So this, I'll show you in that figure over there how it works, so that the cage is sitting there filled with birds. We move it. When we move it, that ground that was left is almost bare ground. It's getting moved every day, and then eventually in about 14 days, it's going to get back to that spot where it was 2 weeks ago, and by that time, it was lush and regrown, and plenty of forage was there. So we're moving them away from, moving them out of fresh forage every day. How we did it, we started in mid-May. That's when our Red Ranger, that's the breed we used. That's when the chicks arrived. And it's also when we planted a cover crop, which was a mostly pea and a pea oat mix that was mostly pea. Again, we wanted the pea for the protein and the nitrogen fixation. We wanted oats because it's going to regrow. We can graze it and it's going to come back, especially if we're grazing in the early stage. They're kept, the cover crop got established while the chicks were brooding, or getting their feathers, and then in mid-June we put them out in those movable pens on that 14-day rotation. And we processed at the end of July, which is about 6 weeks on that pasture. So quickly, to show visually what we saw. So like Fabian was pointing out, one of the things with cover crops, diverse cover crops mixes, is that weed management can be a real issue. You don't want the cover crop going to seed because it can become a weed, and you don't want but you can also get weeds in your cover crop that make it difficult to manage, because if they go to seed, it's going to be problems on the line. So this is not our pens, but it shows. So we're grazing down actually quite a bit more than this, but we saw very few weeds produce seed. There were some weeds in there, but they were getting knocked down. They'd have 2 weeks to grow back up. Nothing can make a flower and set seed that fast. So we kept at it, high intensity grazing and rotating so that cover crops get knocked down and rebounding, and we kept everything at a really young growth stage throughout the season. All right, here's the back of the envelope calculations. So we saw pretty good potential profits on the meat side. We're spending about $5.50 per bird to get them in there and feed them. But with those premiums for poultry and organic poultry, pasture-raised poultry, we had $9 to $13.50 per bird that we could sell it for potentially based on the going market rate in our area. And so that's a hefty profit per bird. And if we look at it per garden bed, so this is 1,000 square feet, we're talking about net returns of 50 to 130 bucks, which isn't bad. It's not as good as a vegetable crop, but it was pretty low labor. I mean, we spent maybe 15 minutes a day taking care of these things. You pick it up, move it, add water, add a little feed, and you're out of there. Most of the work was actually just in processing, which was half a day maybe. So that's not bad. But again, the system was a little bit about the meat, but mostly about the back end returns. So we calculated that we added about 5 tons of fresh poultry manure per acre with that kind of system, which should be able to pay even more. So based on that production, we're hitting our targets. We're getting close to 200 pounds of total N and adding a lot of potassium and phosphorus as well. So that's going to feed our vegetable crops going down the line. And again, getting the same fertility using composted dairy manure from the dairy up the road from me would cost me about $8,000 an acre. Or if we're going to use our 1,000 square foot garden bed, that's $185. So overall, if we look at this, so we're talking about 130, well, let's say $100 of profits just for the poultry and almost $200 for the fertility on a fairly small area in value, which I think makes the cover crop a viable option in the system. So does it work? Well, we're not sure yet. We haven't grown anything there yet. We haven't actually looked at the soil tests to see if we got the fertility this last go around that we thought we would. But it's a rough value of $250 to $350 per 1,000 square foot, which is pretty good. And it doesn't account for the labor, but again, we put in probably at the high end 30 hours of labor over the season, because we're just moving them a little bit over those 6 weeks, 15, 20 minutes a day. So that's a reasonable wage, I think. Ultimately, whether this works, again, it depends on the system. If you have a backyard garden and you're trying to grow something in every spot, fill up the space every year, probably doesn't work. You don't have the space for it. But if you don't have a lot of labor and have a lot of space, a system like this for like a market gardener who's growing a CSA or for a farmer's market, it may work quite well. There's also potential pest control benefits that we'll continue to track, because not only was there very little weed that went to seed. Again, when we moved them on the ground, they were on the new ground. They would snap up any bug that was there. Potential suppression of insect pests. Overall, for this cover crop management and making the system work, I'm going to go against kind of what Fabian was saying, with you can use whatever stocking rate works for you. I think that for these sorts of systems where you're grazing cover crops, stocking rates can be critical. When we had a very high stocking rate, we had, we were able to use up that forage and knock it back within a day. We're getting the fertility that we need out of the system, and also the 2-week return interval, so that we would come back to the same spot in our garden bed cover crop in 2 weeks, and by that time, that cover crop, those oats and peas, had regrown quite a bit. it get consumed again. That seemed to work really well. So this spring we'll be doing the soil tests and planting some vegetables in there to see how it worked. I should have mentioned this is also, this is a study, it's very replicated. We've got multiple plots where the chickens were raised. We also have control plots where we just grew cover crops.
Are you going to till those, that?
Yes, we tilled it in.
Okay.
Yep, as soon as the chickens were off, we tilled it in. And actually planted another cover crop just to hold on to any of that residual nutrients. And then we'll till that in, at least for the production beds, and probably leave that cover crop for our alleys and walkways in the spring. To summarize, it's really making cover crops work in your system, whatever that is. I presented an example today of vegetable production, how integrating livestock with cover crops makes that work, and I think that in general in irrigated systems, that sort of integration of livestock production with the cover crop is really where we're seeing more and more benefits and potential. But I think we could still make this system better by answering a couple questions. So what cover crops to plant? We don't really know, there's not much research about what the relative forage value of different cover crops or cover crop mixes are for poultry. There's just not a lot out there. And also, how do you pick those cover crops to balance the soil benefits and also that nutrient retention? Because again, you have chickens that are putting fresh manure that has a lot of volatile forms of nitrogen. You want that cover crop to be able to snap up those nutrients so they're not either getting dropped out of the bottom of the soil or going up in the atmosphere. Also, we'd like to be able to answer which chicken breeds to use. We've done a couple, and there seem to be differences in how well they grow in this system and their ability to utilize the forage. But again, it's really going to depend on market qualities too, because you don't want to raise a bird that no one's going to buy. In our system, also, we were getting on average between our roosters and our hens, we were producing about a 3-pound bird. Producers that I know who are doing similar things, they can get to a 4 or 4.5 pound bird pretty easily. If we could do that, this system would be much more profitable. So we want to try to get there. And also, we'd like to figure the system out to optimize plant nutrition a little bit, figuring out where we're losing that fertility, if and where we're losing fertility through leaching or volatilization, and tweaking those rates, stocking rates, and also what we're feeding them to see if we can alter the nutrient composition of that manure. There may be some advantages there. And more broadly, looking at how those nutrients are released and for the vegetables over time, to figure out where this fits in the whole rotation. So do you do it once every 3 years, once every 4 years? The longer the better, right? If you can make it work. So with that, I'll take any questions. Also, if you want to come see this system in action, come to our field day, end of July. It's a Thursday afternoon barbecue, not too far away. And we've got a lot of other stuff going on too. So come visit, and yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. In the back.
Have you done any soil testing for nutrient level as a result of this?
So
to verify that you're actually getting those values.
We are going to test in the spring, and we're also going to grow the crops to make sure, to see how they perform.
So right now, you're just looking at the pounds of...
I was looking at pounds of feed and the average manure production per pound of feed per day, and the high and low ends of what the nutrient composition of fresh poultry manure. So we're within shooting distance of where we should be. I'm confident of that. But right, we are going to look down the road because all those nutrients are not gonna be, all that nitrogen isn't gonna be available all at the same time. Some are gonna be released more slowly, and so we wanna look at how that plays out.
A lot of that nitrogen is being volatilized because it's laying there on the ground to incorporate.
Yes, is something, that's one of our concerns. That's also why we had it, had the cover crop in there, because cereals, oats can pick up some of that urea directly. And so we're hoping that cover crop is actually catching some of that and keeping it from volatilizing.
Ways of finding out future testing, all that stuff.
We are starting to put more and more of our research up on our website. And so certainly so we're adding stuff, new stuff every week. And by the spring, we should have quite a bit up there.